I've known you. It's funny. I was looking at LinkedIn. It's approaching closer than I thought to 10 years. For everyone who's listening, please introduce yourself.
So I'm Jim Geckler, and currently I serve as president at Onsite. I have responsibilities around the front end process and relationships, professional relationships. So I work with admissions, with business development. I also help form our alumni team and keep things going there. I sit as a member of the executive team and have been with Onsite for just about a year and a half. Um, I've been working in recovery field, primarily substance use recovery, prior to coming to Onsite for, I think it was 24 years when I last looked. I've worked in sober housing. I've worked in intervention and family consulting. I held a variety of positions and learned a great deal as part of the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation. And I served as president and CEO for it's about 8 years at the Harmony Foundation, which is a legacy nonprofit in Colorado, where you and I did a lot of work together. And I think that's probably our connection on LinkedIn, maybe 10 years old, but I've known you longer than that because we've met through media or through conferences and things like that. I knew you before we worked together.
Awesome. So one of the things that I really want to do, this is a newer podcast, is um, sort of explore the sort of many facets of a person that sort of make him a more dimensional human being. So if we sort of rewind to your earlier days, sort of before leadership titles and boardrooms, sort of what was that first moment that like made you feel greater than you previously knew?
Oh gosh. Well, right after I did the introduction, you started talking. I was like, that was, um, it's funny because I've been doing a lot of personal work around this probably for the last 6 or 7 years. And I listed off things that I do. There was nothing about me. There was no introduction as to who I am as a person. Those were jobs that I've held and been proud of and done well in and made mistakes in. But when I think about like who I am, the things that are really important to me aren't connected to jobs. And immediately after introducing myself, I'm like, all right, well, I already started this off on the wrong foot because I started to talk about accomplishments rather than who I am, and the how that ties in with anxiety, because I know that when I connect myself too much with a role, when I'm too connected with what people think, is when my anxiety goes way up, my depression, my inability to connect goes up. I'm so I grew up in Western New York, and I'm an adoptee, and I had a big loving family. Never felt that I wasn't part of the family because I was adopted, but always knew that I was adopted. So in childhood, there was this ongoing desire to feel connection, to feel a part of things. And I think I first had a feeling that I had accomplished something and that I was good at something when I was in high school. I had a great opportunity to go to a special school in Buffalo, New York that sadly doesn't exist anymore, but they really celebrated people for their differences and for the way they connected in the world. There are, and this is, I'm certainly not looking for empathy or sympathy for being a white cisgender guy in this time and place in the world. But there are, or connected with that, there are expectations that I grew up with that you are only as important as your job. You are only as important as what people, the way the community reflects on you and connects with you. Um, I had I got a post the other day. So when I was about 23 years old, there's a girls' Catholic school in Buffalo, New York, where I grew up called Narden Academy, and this was the late 80s. AIDS was on the rise and was taking people's lives, and being gay and HIV had been politicized, as it still is. And yeah, I was an out gay guy in Buffalo, New York, and I got invited by a child of a friend of mine to come and speak at to this class about social situations at this all girls Catholic school in Buffalo, New York. And I think that was a moment of pride for me, that I went, and there were some girls in the class who were receptive and open. There were some girls, including girls that I knew, who got kind of aggressive about being gay being a sin, which was a message at the school. The school allowed it, which is still amazing to me that they allowed the conversation. It shows how progressive the school was, that they allowed this conversation to happen. But about 4 days ago, I had a friend reach out whose younger sister had been in that classroom. And she's now a teacher in California, and she has kids. And the post that she did was a little pink triangle button. I was very involved in political work with ACT UP, and which was the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, and a group called Queer Nation that was working on LGBTQ rights at the time. It was probably GLB, at the time, but it eventually evolved into that as we grew. And her sister had saved this pin, and she wrote in the post just about how much it meant, and how now as an adult and a teacher, she creates a safe spot for LGBTQ kids in her school, and that her students and her children have always known that being gay is okay. It's not, it's about what you do in that situation that shows your character and shows growth. And, we don't always know, I don't always know when something that I do is going to have an impact on other people. And that meant a great deal to me. And that's, when I look at, and, I know we'll talk about this more, but when I look at like how I want to be remembered, I want to be someone who made a difference to people, who made someone's life that maybe had suffering in it, or could have suffering in it, a little less painful. And getting that message the other day meant the world to me. Here's an opportunity. Here's something that I did because someone stepped out and said, we'd like to have this conversation in our school, and the school allowed it. And I showed up, and it was not, as a person in long-term recovery, it was not when I was at my best as a human being. But I was able to show up that day and talk from a place of honesty and vulnerability about what it was like to be a gay Catholic, and to be a gay Catholic in a blue collar town like Buffalo, New York. So, and it made a difference. And that, so that's one of those moments, and that was really helpful. The other thing, and probably the greatest accomplishment that I have in my life, is my recovery. Getting sober and being able to be of service to other people. That's allowed all the other stuff to happen. The board memberships, the jobs, my 15 years of marriage, all of those things are possible because I was able to follow direction that other people gave me, and then share that experience with people, and to stay sober. So
I think probably everyone is sort of victim to the idea of, sort of identifying as the work, isolating in the work. And when I saw that post, and it's meaningful to other people. I know it was to you personally, but you start to realize sort of the concentric circles around a moment like that add to other people's lives. I mean, I wasn't connected in that story, but one of the things that I really enjoy about being around so many people in recovery, honestly, is it's continuous, but it's always meaningful to me, is when people celebrate their sobriety anniversaries. It's I mean, we have birthdays and things like that, but I don't think we celebrate someone in a birthday in the same way we do with their recovery. I think it's just, for me, different. It's something that they really put effort into. You see the value in the person, as opposed to, okay, let's give someone cake and it's an excuse for a social gathering, more or less. I mean, I think it's just fundamentally a different thing, but there's so many, yeah, I feel so lucky that it's probably close to 2 decades now that I've been around this world where it wasn't intentional. I was invited into it and was attracted to it, and it's again contribute. I love the way of understanding things as best I can clinically, people's mindsets and all that, and really connecting them to something of greater purpose. But yeah, to me, it's important, and I think we not in recovery don't tend to reflect on things as much or have as much intention. So I think that's why I invite anybody to, even if you don't know, at the risk of being sort of too personal in a family situation. Even last night, there was my mother-in-law shared a story about someone who is in need of help. But I felt really good about what are ways to help her friend, to help the person she was trying to help, and it's complicated and it takes a long time to understand and it's not perfect, but um how has it changed, you, like, what are some of the ways that you think it's made you best? Not all the negative stuff like, oh, well, I don't lie in a gutter anymore. That's sort of like the boring stuff in the end.
It is. Yeah, it is completely. Um, I frequently joke with friends, and you and I have probably had a laugh about this, but the idea that I am, and I've been sober for a while. I've been sober for 26 years. So, but I'm still amazed that I am considered the adult in any situation. That, people come to me for we've got a crisis. Jim can help solve the crisis. When for so long, and especially during those developmental years, in my head, I was the crisis. So now I get to give back in that way. I want to make sure we don't knock cake too, because cake is amazing. So we should have cake at every opportunity that we can. And if you go to 12-step meetings in California, they serve cake for people's birthdays. Always try to encourage that because the world needs more cake. It's some of it is in ways that I've shown up that are different today is, I have my own experience, strength, and hope around my recovery, how I got sober, how it's impacted me. I also, because I made the decision to work in this field, and have done good work, have shown up, and I've made plenty of mistakes, but I've also, I have a reputation for showing up and being honest and being caring and having ethics around the way decisions are made. And because of that, people come to me for help. I had someone send me a text about an hour ago. They're looking for a certain type of treatment for someone that they love, and they listen to me because I've been to these programs. I'm at the phase in life now for a long time. I got calls from people saying, my teenager needs this, my spouse needs this. About a year ago, I got a call from a friend who I've enjoyed, in the past, had enjoyed many a margarita with, and she needed help for her grandchild. And so now I'm helping another generation of kids, and so that feels good, to be able to go to bed at the end of the night and say, I've done more to help the world than I've done to hurt it. And I also have an opportunity, if I have done things and when I do things that are hurtful, to try to make them right. And that's, kind of the ongoing thing, because we're going to make mistakes. And I think the major shift, and I try to carry this into work, both for the people that I work with, for the people I report to, for the people who report to me, to create space where you can make a mistake and change. And the problems come up when you're given the opportunity to make a mistake, to make amends for it, and which means to change your behavior. And people say no, and they hardline. And I'd love to say that I'm 100% of this, but I'm certainly not. There are moments where I get very rigid in my belief system and in what I think is right. But especially working in substance use and behavioral health and with the people that, certainly you're coming in, Kevin, without, you know, personal experience about recovery from substance use. I'm sure a few years into it, you're like, oh, I guess I do have recovery around this. I have recovery around this.
Mhm.
Most of us benefit from it somewhere, right? Anyone who has been in a friendship with me is eligible to go to an Al-Anon meeting and get some understanding. If you've got a family member, a coworker, someone you care about, a friend who's got, mental health issues, from anxiety and depression through, more severe mental health issues. There's programs for that. And, when I look at the work that we do at Onsite and programs like Onsite, where people can come in and take a look at their trauma and how, especially childhood trauma, continues to affect us into adulthood, we get better. We get better. And hopefully we don't pass along our poor lessons to another generation of people. They'll have new poor lessons to learn, but we don't have to pass along these to a new generation. So if I grew up in a household where you couldn't talk about feelings, where the only feeling that anyone was interested in hearing about was happiness, and you were struggling with depression, that's a really damaging thing. That's trauma. And to be able to go somewhere and realize, and then in your personal relationships and my personal relationships, be able to say, it's okay to be sad, that I don't just have to show up, or I get to not just show up for the party, but also show up when people are hurting and say, what can I do for you?
For me, I would love and continue to work towards, okay, well, how do we remove barriers to treatment for whatever it is? And so, I mean, I think it's just, how do you learn to stay away from or limit the things that are negative for you,
Yeah.
and focus on the things that are positive? And for me personally, and I can tell you, it's happened in the last couple of days where I'm walking the dog. I thought I was in a good mood. For some reason, I'm a YouTube playing music on whatever it felt like. It started going down an Smith path. And I'm like, at first I'm like, okay, a little of this is good. A lot of this is not good for me. But it's taken me a long time. I've been listening to Elliott Smith for decades. And in the beginning, I could go down weeks of just doing that. And, but now I know, and I've had to learn that about myself. And I think I think if we all realize we all have to just limit or eliminate the things that are blocking us from being the person that we want to be.
That judgment that comes with it too, that like being sad is bad, right?
Mhm.
So we should be happy. Every day should be a joyful walk in the sun with our dogs. And the reality is that there are things that stink in the world. And things that, are going to make us sad, are going to feel sad. Those are normal responses. I was talking to a friend of mine about 2 weeks ago. This one is an amazing, amazing speaker around grief, Megan Jarvis, and she was, we had to put a cat down. So we had a 23-year-old cat. We had to put it to sleep. I got to be there. I mean, this was a gift that I got to be there with this amazing little animal at the end of his life and hold him and tell him that he was loved and cry, and I'm there right now, and that's a gift. And for so long in my life, it was anything that I connected as a negative feeling. I tried to escape, and that lasted well into recovery. I would sober and, would have a relationship end or wouldn't get a job or wouldn't, whatever the list is. And I could move into a space of beating myself up about it when it passes, and that knowledge that, and I do not consider myself a spiritual counselor by any stretch of the terms. But when I look at like the Buddhist understanding, as I understand it, these feelings come and visit us and they go. And, I suffer when I try to stay attached to one of them instead of just acknowledging them. If I'm trying to keep happy all the time, um, then I'm going to know pain greater than if I acknowledge happiness and sit with it while it's there, and then acknowledge boredom or anger or sadness, uh, and give them the respect they want to, because they're going to pass too.
I think so much of in the end, and what I try to do is how do I make sure that I'm in a position of strength to work through these situations in the right way. It's broadening it out, and I like to explore a sort of like the concept of environments of success.
Yeah.
And I think that can be for yourself, for you, the boards you're on, the organizations that you run, the campuses that you've led, and so other people can get well. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to create um, those different sort of systems there. But how do you approach that?
Well, differently than I did 10 years ago. I um, certainly there's a greater level of humility that I've had, because I felt a lot of ownership. I felt a lot of, whether something happened or didn't happen landed on my shoulders. And, when you're in a leadership position, there are things you have to carry around with you. There are responsibilities. The success or failure of things that aren't in your control, it's not helpful to have on your shoulders. And my experience has been, when I take that on, when, the success of a project, it doesn't go the way I want, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a failure. Now, if I look at it and try to force something to go the way that I want it to go, even though it's clearly not working, then that I would look at as a failure. If I can say, here's a project that we want to do, we're going to put everything together and then see where it goes. And then when it goes there, we'll make decisions. That's success to me. And I'll use an example, and you're close to this too, because when I was with Harmony, we had to evacuate the entire facility, and we had to evacuate at the height of COVID. And the Red Cross wasn't able to provide housing for our people because they weren't considered residents of Estes Park, Colorado. And there was an hour drive away from the facility with no cell service whatsoever. So we had multiple people. If I tried to force it to go the way the initial decision was, it would have failed. Because we worked in a system that said, okay, here's the thing that we need to do. And then we decide what the next thing is. And then when we decide what the next thing is, then we can be successful. It's also, and this can be, when I am in good spiritual health, when I'm in a good sense of self and doing my own work, I take great joy in other people doing their work and flourishing. I try, from a leadership point of view, to get the right people in the job, support them, give them direction, but not dictate what they're doing. Because at that point, I'm 2 or 3 people removed from the job. So trying to dictate and control that gets in the way. I think I've completely gone off track from the question you asked, but I like what I'm talking about. So we're just going to keep going. But in there, it's because it was about
Just environment of success. As a leader, you're not only helping them do the function of the job, but you're helping them sort of graduate and become who they want to be, as well. So you're spinning a number of plates. It's not as simple as I think some from the outside might think of. But when you look at the learnings that you've had as you've gone from, I think you said you were a barista. Is that that
well, in recovery, yes,
in recovery. Yeah.
I was a manager of Caribou Coffee at the Mall of America.
Yes.
Yep.
So, I mean, and I think most people who are sitting in a Caribou Coffee, managing there, don't see themselves as president of Onsite. They don't see that trajectory. But what are the most important learnings that you've had that would help that next person not only sort of believe themselves, but be like, you know what? Stay away from this. Like, you're going to think this is important, but it's actually going to be the landmine that's going to blow you up.
Yep. So great question. I think the first thing is, so there's a kind of a negative connotation with the word opportunist. I don't see it negative. I mean, you can certainly, if you're taking advantage of someone, that's not a great thing. But if you get the opportunity to do something or try something, do it. If someone says, "Hey, we need you to be on this committee," okay, I'm going to learn about that. Being and find yourself a mentor and know like the path of mentorship. So look at someone who has ethics that are aligned with yours. And maybe I learned this through sponsorship in a 12-step program and finding someone who had something that I wanted. Not every person I've chosen to be a mentor has worked out to be a mentor in the way I wanted. I've had a couple that I've learned great lessons about what not to do. And would look back and say, I mean, in a half joking way, how would this person handle this situation? And I'm going to do the exact opposite. And most of that, the people that I have found who have been great mentors in my life are, they're really smart. I like smart people. I like to surround myself with smart people. They're kind. There's a kindness in there, and there's a level of accountability. And mixed in with the accountability and kindness is the chance to say, "Hey, you're really missing the mark here. Let me help you get realigned." That becomes important. There's no fast way to win a marathon. And work, whatever it is, relationships, these are marathons. If we're in for the long run, I used to have a t-shirt that says, life is a journey, not a guided tour. I liked it because I had a sailboat on it. But the message there, that we have to find our way with the help of lots of people around us. We have to try things out and be willing to say, this isn't working for me. That change is not failure. There are things that I've looked back on where I've had to say, okay, obviously, I was a barista, I worked in sober housing, I worked in intervention, I worked at multiple treatment centers, and I'm here, so I have left jobs. And that's not a failure. I needed to move on in order to continue to grow. So not staying stagnant, finding people who you look up to. There are people. I was recently at a conference in Texas. There's a guy in our field, Kurt Garvey. I know you know Kurt. Been around forever, and he was one of the first people that I connected with 20 some years ago at a conference at the Breakers in Palm Beach. Terrible conference, but great space. And he said, "Let me introduce you to some people." And when I looked at the people who had respect for him, those are people that I wanted to interact with. So I looked at the way he did business, and he did business by saying what he meant and then doing what he said. And so being true to his word. And it was, he came up to me outside this conference recently and said, "So how much longer are we going to be doing this?" We're both approaching that phase of life. And in that, so I would also say, don't always look up in an org chart point of view to people to mentor you. I've had plenty of people who report to me who are mentors to me in multiple ways. And that's how I grew. And just remain curious, be open, and be willing to say, the path that I'm on isn't working for me anymore. And I need to make a change.
Yeah, and I like that. And I think some of the people I respect most are the ones that continue to seek mentors, that they're not too cool for them, you anymore. And, when you going back to sort of the concept of the opportunist that mm, you mentioned before, I think there's two things around it. It's to your point, saying yes, when you have an opportunity. But just yesterday at an event I was at, this guy was talking, and he said, "You don't get what you don't ask for."
Mhm.
And I think that's true. And I think I was briefly associated with the Freemasons, and the only way to become a Freemason is to ask. So you got to think about, you have to create your own things, but also, what I've always tried to do, and the people who've sort of meant the most to me do as well, as create opportunities for other people as well. So it's not just looking up and not just looking at yourself, but looking at those around you, because it will make you more successful. It will make you more connected to them. Um, and quite frankly, you're likely to do better work
Mhm.
when you're not trying to do all the work and get all the credit, as well. Um, Going into sort of, growth, and I want to talk more about the work that you're doing on site. You've been there, a year and a half
Yeah.
now. I mean, I think just to kind of set the table for, the next few minutes here, can you explain what onsite is?
Sure. So, so on site, we have multiple campuses. So we have residential and intensive programming in Tennessee, in Cumberland Furnace, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. We have a intensive program that we hold at the Oaks once a month, right outside of San Diego. It's a beautiful campus out there, in the hills outside of San Diego. And we have an outpatient and general practice at our offices in Nashville, in the Nations in Nashville, which is in a very cool space. And it's cool because there's a cold plunge gym in the building, so it's right on online. Um, the so my first engagement with Onsite was about 16 years ago. I was working at Hazel and Betty Ford at the time. I was 10 or 11 years sober. And I was struggling with the happiness idea. And on site, we do a men's and women's leadership retreat every year. And my first experience was coming from a men's leadership retreat. I've done that about 15 times now. And I've also taken part in our Living Center program, which is one of our group intensives. And what I found was that there was trauma that was holding me back. So we focus on trauma and working with people through their trauma experience. We don't, well, I would say the majority of people coming to us probably have a substance use or a behavioral issue. The primary purpose for people coming is for trauma. We do individual intensives, which is a couple of days one-on-one with a therapeutic guide. We do couples intensives, that same model, and family intensives. And then we have group intensives. And I'm a treatment guy, so there's nothing happier in my world than to walk into a room that has a circle of chairs, because I know exactly how it's going to work, and I'm really comfortable in that. I'm also, for someone who is a talker, I get more out of watching other people do their work. I'm consistently amazed by people's bravery. I don't, I don't, because of judgments I have of myself, I don't think that talking about my stuff is that brave. But I'm amazed at other people's bravery and the way that they're able to face what's going on in their world. And so I love a group setting, and my experience at Onsite has been group. So we do those intensives, both here and in California. We also have Milestones, which is our residential program. And that's when people are a little bit more, they're working through trauma that's making it a little bit harder for them to show up in a daily life. And there's zero judgment around trauma, because one of the things is my parents never divorced, but I know people who are children of divorce who have no issues around relationships, no trust issues. They saw that their parents shouldn't have been married. They they had a great life because of it. I know other children of divorce who can't get into relationships because they don't trust the divorce. They fall right into a traumatic piece, or they were used as an emotional surrogate by one parent, um, or something else. They struggled with that. And for me, I struggled in interpersonal relationships. I struggled with trust. Um, and the work that I needed to do was around how, because of the upbringing, the trauma that was passed down to my parents, they didn't know how to show up for me. And to forgive them for that and realize that this is their stuff. And, you know, having a parent who can't meet a need of a child doesn't mean they're a bad parent. It means that they're working through their stuff. And we have a focus on experiential care here, psychodrama, and I have found it, and thousands of others have found it to be incredibly helpful to move them past that into a place of kindness. I certainly know, and that I had a great deal of anger toward my father throughout most of my life, and um, shortly after I first came to Onsite, my mom passed away. And if I had not done the work that I did at Onsite, I would not have been able to be present for my father. Um, I just would not have, I wouldn't have been able to see him as a person who was carrying his own baggage through life. So I'm incredibly grateful to Onsite for that. And I hear stories like that from people all the time. I came in with this idea of this is who my parent, my spouse, you know, I struggle when people say, oh, you married your mother, you married your father, that kind of thing. Because to me, the idea of marrying my father, from a personality point of view, I'm like, oh no, never. And I look at Peter all the time, and just like, yeah, there's some similarities there. There's some things uh, that I wasn't aware of that drew me to this person. So um, it becomes part of the whole exploration. We the intensives really are, it's like 5 years of therapy in a weekend. I've been in and out of therapy since I was about 12 years old, and this is what changed my life. And that's one of the reasons that when I started looking around and saying I wasn't as fulfilled working in substance use as I had been. Um, I was struggling with multiple aspects of it, but the fulfillment about working with people who were coming in and coming back and coming back, and for similar reasons was getting to me. And for years, when I've had this conversation with people about I'm stuck in life, what do I do? And we have two core programs at Onsite. One is called the Living Center program. One is called Healing Trauma. They're both exceptional programs, but I've always kind of looked at Living Centered as I'm stuck and I don't know what's going on. I can't really put my finger on it. And so I came into the Living Center, and that freed me up. I was like, I don't understand this, because it had nothing to do, as often is the case, the conflict I'm having in life today has nothing to do with the conflict that I'm having in life today. It's about not getting a bike when I was 16.
Mm.
And the fact that that is disrespectful. So any slight moving forward from that, I take as a core disrespect. And how do I manage that? And that's what we teach at Onsite, is here are some tools to manage that. We have a saying here, we look at a 2-degree shift. If you're leaving New York and you're headed to Seattle, and you're off by 2 degrees, you're going to end up in LA. Probably my math may be wrong. Please don't pull a map out for that, but it's going to make a difference. And for us going forward, it's like, all right, I'm going to pause and I'm going to respond in a different way, a slightly different way. And then that grows. And I believe it makes us better people. Um, we sometimes refer to the programming that we offer at Onsite, whether it's at Milestones or the Oaks or outpatient. And we have a great trauma outpatient program in Nashville. Um, but we refer to it as human school because this is things aren't working out, and it's not because there's drugs and alcohol in my life. It's not because there's a behavioral issue. It's not that I'm gambling. Those things may not make it better, but they're probably there to mask something or address something that I haven't addressed yet.
I was listening to another podcast where they were talking about, okay, if you really want to change, just focusing on changing 1% every day, you
Yep.
know, and I think there's something to it. I mean, one of the things that, when you think of a goal like that, or you think of, it's, you want it to happen overnight. And a lot of times it simply isn't. And so you have to, what I kind of try to take away from, those in recovery is, well, then let's work on today, let's make sure today, goes well. And over time, you're going to hit that destination. It goes back to the marathon, analogy that you made before. Um, it, it wouldn't work if I just left this recording, went out my front door and tried to run 26.2 miles. But you have to start somewhere.
Yep.
Uh,
There's also a reason I think that, when you're sticking on marathons is we do them in a community, right? Um, the, I had to learn this, and I took this away from substance use treatment, but I'm going to go home to a family system, a work system, a social system that has not been through what I've been through. So if I come and suddenly I realize, oh, the reason that I'm struggling to be in a relationship is connected to a trauma that my grandmother had. My brother doesn't know that and hasn't had that experience. So I can't really say, oh, you're not really upset. This is because Nana had this happen. It's like, telling someone to calm down when they're upset. It doesn't work. You have to have the experience yourself. Which is why I'll tell you, we see so many, and it warms my heart, so many families come through where one person comes through and then their spouse does, or a child does, or parents do. And then they're able to approach things from a place of solidarity.
You mentioned the word trust before, and as soon as you said it, I sort of reflected on a conversation I had with another woman recently around it, and she feels like she's a very giving, easily tries to be vulnerable. She wants to create those situations where her husband is the exact opposite and sort of almost like shames her as a result of that, and wants to really have these high barriers. I sort of early on in my life, or I spent most of my life, I should say, really focusing in on trust over very long periods of time and earning people's trust over long periods of time. And I thought it'd be more meaningful, and focusing on relationships that I've had with people since they were 18 years old that I've had with them. But I think one of the things that I've learned through TPAS and sort of trying to find what's the right amount of vulnerability in the right situation, where it can be extremely healthy. I think of the triads that we have with TPAS. And it's one of the things that I truly look forward. I talk about it all the time. I look forward to those moments. There was another sort of speaking thing that I did where we did something similar. And it really surprised me and stuck with me, where having a conversation with someone that a broad question was asked. And next thing I know, this woman who I've never met before is crying and saying, like, I've never told anybody this before. But it's like, in a lot of ways it was healthy. And I think in this case, it was okay to be vulnerable. We were probably never going to see each other, again. So if you need to get it off your chest and talk it through a little bit, like, I might be the perfect person, as opposed to someone that it might raise conflicts down the road or make other, situations, different. I mean, what are your sort of reflections on trust?
Yeah. So I try to come into most situations, most relationships from a place of trust. Um, uh, I do struggle when people enter relationships from a place of distrust. That's not my mindset. Um, trust, trust gets broken all the time. People are going to do things. I'm going to do things that cause people pain and make them not trust me. Yeah, I'm pretty quick to give people a second chance, to, come back and say, so this hurt, or I felt you weren't honest. I try to believe them when they say, if they say, oh, too bad, then I take them for who they are and know that they're not, they're not a safe person to go to talk about something vulnerable. Um, if they say, I'm terribly sorry, that wasn't my intent, and we move forward and their behavior changes, then yeah, that's great. If it doesn't, then I have to learn, where to go. I, it, it's funny. So when I was dating 20 years ago, um, being in recovery, all of these things, I wasn't terribly interested in having dates with people who were going to want to go and do drugs after the date or on the date. And so I would just be real honest. I'm like, listen, I'm sober. I'm sober this long. I don't drink. I don't do drugs. This is why. That's a lot to throw up on someone on a first date. But I would do it because then I could see if I could trust them to a degree.
Hmm.
So it wasn't really a test around trust. When I look back on it now, that was an aspect of it, but it was really just like, let's not waste each other's time. If this is going to be a problem, the it is a challenge when we have broken someone's trust, um, and that happens when we say we're going to do something and then we don't do it. When we're party to something that hurts someone, that's a challenge. And I think when that happens, showing up and trying to fix it is the best we can do. And in leadership, um, if you're gonna lead from a place, if you lead from an ethical place, you're still going to break trust at some point because there's decisions that can cause you to have to make other decisions. I don't know. I'm trying to talk around this a little bit, but yeah, I think trust can be rebuilt if you have multiple people who are willing to rebuild the trust and willing to be vulnerable. There's also a time and a place for vulnerability. And I've been in job interviews, working in the field that I work in. People are often in recovery and have their own stories. And I've been in job interviews where people have spelled out their entire using history. I'm like, it's a little much. Let's dial it back just a bit. I didn't need to know all of this to know if you can, you know, answer the phone. But it's nice that when you can create a space where people can do that. And also it's good to know kind of to be able to read social cues and know when it's time to be vulnerable and not.
Right. Yeah.
I love TPAS too, and I find that style of conversation and for people who don't know TPAS, Kevin and I both have we both do still sit on the board of TPAS, which provides support for treatment providers and alumni services. Many of the people who come to those conferences I've found to the collaboratives are people who have never had an opportunity in a professional setting to talk about being scared or frustrated or difficulties. And I've had leaders. I've been fortunate enough to work for people who encourage that. I've worked for people who manipulate that, who manipulate vulnerability, and that's not a good feeling. So it's yeah.
Hmm. One final question, but I want to be mindful of time. Do you have a hard stop in a minute?
I don't. I'm good.
Okay, perfect. I can edit that out. Um, So what are you still curious about? Like what's unfinished for you at this point?
So um my dad was a successful dentist, and when he retired, his life fell apart. He had no purpose. I'm really curious about what's next for me, and what because I'm going to be 59 in a month. Retirement, and I'd like to retire at some point, I think, is not that far off. So what does that look like? Um, I'm curious about what's going to happen to the field that I've been honored to work in for the last 25 years, in the next 3 years, the next 10 years, as things changed. You mentioned boards, and I have the privilege of sitting on both the TBAS board and the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers. And there's a lot of curiosity about what it's going to look like in 5 years, and what the field is going to look like. Will parity stick around? What's going to happen uh, with Medicaid? What's going to happen with all of these people who need help? Um, so I'm curious about how we get creative and continue to help people. Um, yeah, I get really curious about like human nature. Like there's people that I watch, and like in our field, and like I'm kind of curious to see what they're going to do next and if they're going to make the right choice or not.
Mhm.
What I think is the right choice. And so that drives me. I have a lot of, and we've kind of, so most of the things I'm curious about are not work related. I'm looking right now for my 60th birthday to do the National Geographic cruise to Antarctica. And I'm really curious about that. As you know, I love to travel and love to go to places that I haven't been. And I've never been to Antarctica, so that'll be an interesting one. Um, I'm super curious about technology, uh, uh, what AI is going to do to our field, along with others. I already see it used for clinical notes. We see it for writing copies. I saw it in a resume the other day where I'm like, this mistake clearly is an AI mistake. Um, and so that I'm very curious about. I was having a conversation with a coworker on the way to lunch today just about cell phones. Because I remember as an early adopter having a brick phone, and then the Motorola flip phone that you couldn't make phone calls until after 9 o'clock because that's when the calls were free. And now I can pull up everything in the world, on something the size of a wallet. It's what's next?
Yeah, exactly. It's ridiculous. And some of it might be different when we think about. So, in the same Easter event, we had a conversation because what may be a trend that I'm starting to hear about anyway is that Gen Z is starting to have this return to flip phones. That they're looking at everything that's been going on. They're not engaged. They're going in dinners where everyone's just sitting in on their phone, and want to go the other direction. So I'm very curious, what happens with that. I'm also very curious about, AI. I see a lot of it done badly, but those are the growing pains that happen, in life from any, aspect that you're going to try new things and you're going to fail.
Yeah.
And you're going to learn from them, and you're going to grow. And hopefully when you fail, it's not in a catastrophic, way. But, sort of finally, how do you define legacy and not as what's sort of left behind, but what's lived now?
So so when I look at legacy for myself, um, and we had started by talking about this, but it's not so much how I'll be remembered or if there's a plaque. So my dad was a very accomplished man, and when he passed away, there were boxes and boxes of plaques and awards and uh, you know just lovely things that were written about him, and they were thrown out. I mean, they were, at the end of the day, um, I had a bunch from an old job at one point that I had moved a couple of times. I threw them out during this because like it doesn't really matter that I was employee of the year in 1991. That stuff doesn't continue. Um, the I think the legacy, um, I want to have made a positive difference. Um, that's it, and it doesn't need to be. My name doesn't need to be on a building. My picture doesn't need to be on a wall, but that there's a high school kid in California who knows that someone back in the 80s said you're not going to go to hell because you're gay, um, or that there's a solution there. That there are people that I've talked to coming into treatment or at treatment who went home a little bit different. They may not even remember my name. They may not remember anything about me, except that we had an interaction that let them know that they were okay. And if I want a legacy, that would be the legacy. That there are, because of things that I have done, the world has the ability to be a better place. And I think people that write books are great. I think that, I think that people who give large amounts of money to organizations so that they can do the right thing by a mission, I think that that's nice. If you want your name on a building, that's okay. I think that most of us don't walk through life wanting our name to be on a building or our face to be on a mountain or, our whatever it might be. To me, legacy is the impact that we have on the world when we're gone. And I would like mine to be a positive one.